What's good with you guys? It's Jibu. And I'm going to answer the question on whether or not black people should stop talking about slavery.
I want to be richer than Jay-Z, my brother, I'm hoping that I will be rich. Isn't so tired of living the way that I live. If I make it, I buy my own crib. They tell me I'm quiet like Gary, I don't like a carry no Sandy, I'm clapping those cheeks. Then my song will repeat, I'll be running the streets in a year that is by my beast. And I be like, all of these people keep hating on me, I'm like Chris, everybody hates me. Well, I be like, fuck everybody, I never had anyone willing to help but a G. And now
Black people are often told to get over slavery and to get over it due to the following examples, with one being that black people living today were never enslaved. 2, that slavery ended a long time ago. 3, that white people were once slaves. And the 4th claim being that black people enslaved and sold other black people as slaves. Now, although I have never been a slave, and there are black people living today that have never been enslaved, there are black people living today that are descendants of black slaves. And I don't understand the issue with sympathizing and demanding justice for people that were wrongfully mistreated, that received no compensations for what they had to go through. These were real human beings that were undeservedly stripped away from their freedom and human rights. Every other race group, apart from black people, received reparations. Jewish people alive today were never a part of the Holocaust, and yet they still care deeply about it and are never told to get over it. And if I'm not mistaken, Jewish people to this day are still being paid reparations. Now, onto the claim in which slavery ended a long time ago. There are more slaves today than ever before, with over 45 million people being enslaved by the time of this recording. So although slavery has become illicit in countries such as the USA, slavery as a whole is still ongoing, with slavery even continuing in countries such as the USA. Now it is true that white people were once slaves, enslaving their own as well as being enslaved by the Arabs during the barbaric slave trade. However, white slaves were treated far greater than black slaves during the barbaric slave trade. Not to downplay or excuse how the white slaves were treated, but the white slaves weren't compelled to do as much labor compared to their counterparts and were allowed to work their way up the rankings, unlike the black slaves. And according to the US Census, Arabic people are considered to be white. I would also like to debunk the myth that Irish people were once slaves. Irish people were actually servants, and the difference between a slave and a servant back then was that servants actually had rights, slaves didn't. Now unfortunately, it is true that black people did enslave other black people, as well as give away other black people to be enslaved, which of course is inexcusable, and the black people that sold and enslaved other black people should be held accountable. However, the black people that sold other black people to become enslaved were never informed about how they would be treated, and never expected the black slaves to be treated horribly, considering the fact that the majority of African kingdoms that enslaved other black people treated the black slaves with respect and as a human being. They never realized that the black slaves were being cannibalized, sexually exploited and castrated, and they never mentioned how there were black slaves that were kidnapped without the acknowledgement and agreement of other African kingdoms. Even with black people enslaving and selling other black people as slaves, it doesn't excuse how the black slaves were treated by non-black slave owners. Everybody that contributed into the suffering of the black slaves should take ownership of it. I believe that one of the main reasons as to why the topic of black people being enslaved is often avoided is due to how much the black slaves are owned in reparations. Studies suggest that every African American should receive $151 million, and America wasn't even the biggest African slave importers. So imagine how much is owed to the black slaves that were enslaved by the likes of the British, who were one of the biggest African slave importers. But it's obvious that they don't want to go bankrupt and don't respect us enough to want to pay reparations to the black people that deserve it. The fact that the British finished paying off reparations to the British slave owners in 2015, but not a single British black slave or a descendant of a British black slave has received a penny of reparations is preposterous. Anyway, to answer the question, should black people get over slavery? I don't believe black people should get over slavery until justice has been served, considering the fact that the black slaves never received compensation for what they had to go through, as well as it having an effect on the descendants of the black slaves alive today. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure you like, subscribe, peace and take care of yourselves. I'm out.